Stop. What would you do if the man who promised you the world humiliated you and cast you out for not being good enough for his family name? This is the story of Clara Hayes, the woman who was discarded by a coward, and how life, 2 years later, delivered brutal justice in the form of 2 pairs of identical blue eyes. The truth always finds a way to surface, but sometimes the truth comes with 2 cribs. The Ashford family axe. The chandelier above her trembled with hundreds of crystal tears, scattering light onto the polished mahogany table where silver gleamed and conversation floated like smoke. Clara Hayes felt like an intruder in someone else's life. Every smile around her was rehearsed. Every word carried the weight of money and lineage. She had been here before, at these dinners at the Ashford family estate on the Upper East Side of New York, where she tried to fit into his world, telling herself that love could bridge the abyss between their lives. But tonight, as she looked across the table at Daniel Ashford, the abyss showed itself for what it was, a chasm he had no intention of crossing. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable, his blue eyes fixed on the untouched wine glass before him. She sensed what was coming even before he opened his mouth. The gaze of his mother, Eleanor Ashford, landed on Clara as a silent warning. The thin smile of his father, Richard, cut the air like a knife. The elegant, hushed conversation bubbling around them ceased when Daniel's voice finally broke the murmur, quiet yet deliberate, each syllable chosen like a blade. "You do not belong here, Clara." The words were soft enough that only those closest could hear, but they struck her with the force of a storm. For a heartbeat, she thought she had misheard, that perhaps he was defending her, not condemning her. But the way he looked at her, cold, definitive, left no room for doubt. "You are not good enough for my family." A low ripple ran across the table, the kind of silence that carries more judgment than sound. Clara's hand trembled as she set down her glass. Her pulse roared in her ears. She tried to meet his eyes, to search for any trace of the man who had once held her as if she were his entire world. But there was only a stranger sitting there in a tailored suit, playing the obedient son. She swallowed the pain rising in her throat, forcing herself to breathe evenly. "I see," she said softly, barely audible. She could have begged, could have asked if all their moments, the laughter, the promises whispered in the dark, meant nothing. But she didn't. She saw the relief flicker in Eleanor's eyes, and that was enough. Clara rose slowly from her seat. Her chair scraped against the marble floor, the sound sharp and final. Her legs felt weak, but she kept her head high as she headed toward the exit. Daniel did not follow her. He did not move. He simply sat there, hands tightly clenched, his gaze fixed on the table, as if the sight of her leaving was something he couldn't bear to witness. Outside, the night was cold. The air bit at her cheeks, but the chill was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. She walked the long driveway, her heels echoing against the stones, her breath unstable. The car that had brought her was gone. She didn't care. She needed distance, space, anything to drown out the sound of his voice repeating in her head. "You are not good enough for my family." When she reached the main road, tears had already blurred her vision, but she didn't stop walking. The lights of New York glittered in the distance, distant and uncaring. Deep down, she had known this day would come. Men like Daniel Ashford did not defy their world. They obeyed it. Still, knowing it didn't make the wound smaller. That night, she packed her few belongings in silence. The apartment they had shared felt smaller now, filled with ghosts of laughter that no longer belonged to her. She found one of his shirts tossed over a chair and pressed it to her face. The scent of him, the trace of cologne, the warmth of his skin, finally broke her composure. She sank onto the bed and let the tears come, deep and soundless, until there was nothing left inside her but exhaustion. The next morning, she left without a note. The sun rose indifferently, bright over the city that never cared who loved or who broke. She walked to the train station, clutching her bag, her hands shaking, but her chin held high. When the train pulled away, she didn't look back. The two pink lines and the silent war. Only a few weeks later, sitting alone in a small clinic room in Seattle, Washington, with the sound of rain tapping against the window, she saw the two faint pink lines appear on the test in her hand. Her breath hitched, the world tilted. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even cry. Then she pressed a hand to her stomach, her pulse quickening beneath her fingers. It was no longer just her story, it was theirs. And though Daniel's voice still echoed in her mind, cold and definitive, she whispered softly to the life growing inside her, "You are enough." The following days were a blur of exhaustion, fear, and fragile determination. Clara had never felt so utterly alone, yet so fiercely protective of something she barely understood. The clinic visit had changed everything. The faint heartbeat she heard through the doctor's stethoscope became the anchor that kept her from completely falling apart. She moved around her small apartment in the Pike Place market area, like someone relearning how to exist. Her morning sickness was relentless, her body ached, her emotions were unstable, but she clung to one thought. The small life inside her depended on her strength. Her job at the tiny The Emerald City Books became her refuge. The owner, an elderly woman named Doña Margaret, noticed Clara's pale face and trembling hands, but asked no questions. She simply started giving her shorter shifts, more breaks, and hot teas that smelled of honey and chamomile. The quiet rhythm of stacking books, dusting shelves, and listening to the soft murmur of customers gave Clara moments of peace. Sometimes she would gently place her hand over her stomach and whisper to herself that everything would be all right, even when she didn't believe it. At night, the loneliness returned. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Daniel's words over and over until they became something surreal. "You are not good enough for my family." The cruelty wasn't just in what he said, but in the ease with which he said it, how little it seemed to cost him. She wanted to hate him. Sometimes she almost succeeded. But then, in the quiet of those nights, she remembered how he used to look at her when they were alone, when his eyes softened, when he touched her as if she were made of something precious, and the hatred dissolved into grief. When the first snow of winter fell, Clara stood by the window, watching the streets turn white. She thought about calling him once, not to beg or accuse, but to tell him their story hadn't ended the way he thought. Her fingers hovered over her phone, trembling, before she locked it again and pressed it to her chest. He had chosen his world, and she would have to build hers without him. The months crawled by. Her belly rounded, her reflection softened. Strangers began to smile at her on the street, to hold doors, to ask kind questions. The small gestures meant more than she could explain. One night, when she was 7 months along, she felt the first real kick. It startled her so much she burst into laughter, tears streaming at the same time. That small movement reminded her that she wasn't as lost as she thought. There was a purpose within her now, growing stronger every day. Labor came on a cold night in early spring. It was harder than anything she had ever endured. The pain tore through her like fire, and there were moments she thought she couldn't survive. But when the cries of 2 newborn girls filled the room, the world stopped spinning. She looked at them, tiny, perfect, both wrapped in white blankets, and felt something sacred settle inside her chest. One had her lips, the other his eyes, both stunningly beautiful. The nurse placed them in her arms, and Clara wept silently. Not out of despair this time, but out of a love so overwhelming it felt like light filling every dark corner she had carried for months. She kissed their foreheads and whispered their names softly, as if pronouncing a promise to the universe. Lily and Rose. The nights in the hospital were long and sleepless, but she didn't mind. She sat with them glued to her, memorizing their faces, their soft breathing, the warmth of their skin. Every sound, every movement, every small sigh was proof that she had survived what was meant to destroy her. When Doña Margaret came to visit with flowers and tears in her eyes, Clara smiled for the first time in months. She left the hospital 2 weeks later with both babies bundled in her arms, walking out into the crisp morning light. The city still moved with the same indifferent rhythm, but to her, it looked different now. Every sound, every shadow, every gust of wind felt alive. She had no money, no family, no man to lean on. But she had something stronger than all of that. She had them, and for the first time since Daniel's words had broken her heart, she no longer felt small. She no longer felt insufficient. The weight of 2 tiny bodies in her arms made her realize she was more than enough, because love, the quiet, fierce, selfless kind, was already remaking her into someone new. The 2 years of silence and the counterpart. The next few years became a rhythm of survival and tenderness. The small apartment Clara rented was far from the life she once imagined, but it became a world of warmth, love, and quiet laughter. Every corner smelled faintly of baby powder and milk. Every morning started before dawn, with the soft cries of Lily or Rose echoing in the stillness. The exhaustion was constant, but so was the joy. There were moments she thought her body would collapse from lack of sleep. Yet one look at their tiny faces gave her a strength she never knew she possessed. She learned to do everything alone. Feedings, laundry, night terrors, doctor visits. Everything became a second skin to her life. There was no time to dwell on the past, and perhaps that was her blessing. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The delicate girl Daniel met had been replaced by a woman with tired eyes, but an unbreakable determination. She no longer cared about being perfect. She cared about keeping her daughters safe, warm, and smiling. The bookstore remained her haven. Doña Margaret had become more than an employer. She was a friend, almost like family. She let Clara bring the twins in on quiet afternoons, when business was slow. The girls would sit near the reading nook, surrounded by books, their curious eyes taking in everything. Customers often stopped to smile at them, commenting on how identical they looked, how striking their blue eyes were. Clara would smile politely, but inside she felt a bittersweet pang every time someone mentioned those eyes, because they were Daniel's. Lily was the talker, fearless and stubborn. Rose was quieter, observant, with a smile that crept in slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Clara saw parts of herself in both, but there was something undeniably his in their gestures. Sometimes she would watch them play and wonder if he ever thought of her, if he ever dreamed of the life he had so easily thrown away. She told herself it no longer mattered, that she no longer had space for those thoughts, yet the question lingered somewhere deep inside, refusing to completely fade. Winter returned, covering the streets in pale light. The girls had turned too, their laughter now filling every silence that used to torment Clara. They loved running in the small park near their home, bundled in coats and scarves, their cheeks rosy from the cold. Clara would chase them, breathless but smiling, her heart full in a way she had never known before. Despite all the struggles, she knew she had built something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. Interaction question. If you were in Clara's place, would you tell Daniel about the girls? Or would you keep their existence a secret to protect them from his family's scorn? Leave your opinion in the comments. The encounter in the hidden corner of Seattle. Daniel Ashford's life had become a polished performance. Every morning began with the same quiet precision. A tailored suit, an untouched breakfast, a waiting chauffeur, and an agenda full of meetings that never seemed to end. Newspapers still called him one of the most powerful young CEOs in the country, a man who had taken his family's empire and expanded it beyond what even his father thought possible. On the surface, he had everything he was once told to desire: wealth, status, and the approval of those whose opinions once mattered. But somewhere in the process of building the perfect life, he had lost the ability to feel alive inside it. He had convinced himself this was maturity, that detachment was strength. One afternoon, while reviewing a proposal, he saw a photograph in the file. A small local bookstore, partnering with one of his community programs. It was small, ordinary, unremarkable. But behind the shop window, blurred by the light's reflection, he thought he saw a familiar silhouette. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. It wasn't clear, and yet, something inside him instantly shifted, an instinct so profound it almost hurt. Weeks later, it was an ordinary afternoon when their worlds collided again, though nothing about the moment felt ordinary to Daniel. He had canceled an appointment and told his chauffeur to take a different route, driven by an inexplicable restlessness. The car stopped near a row of small restaurants and shops on a secluded street near Pike Place Market. He asked the driver to stop. He adjusted his coat and walked toward a coffee shop with a warm light, and then he saw her. She was sitting near the window, a soft scarf around her neck, her hair loose and shiny under the golden light. Two small girls sat across from her, identical in every way, except for the way they smiled. One shy, the other bold. They were laughing at something she said, their tiny hands reaching for her as she helped them cut pieces of pastry. For a moment he couldn't move. His breath hitched in his throat, and the entire room seemed to fade into silence. Clara. The name rushed through him like a memory he had buried too deep to recognize at first. The girls looked about 2 years old, maybe a little older, their hair dark and shiny, their eyes incredibly blue. His mind fought to process it, his body frozen in place. It wasn't possible, and yet it was. He took a step closer, every sound around him suddenly distant. The older girl turned her head, her gaze meeting his for only a second. She smiled, a wide, fearless smile, and he felt his chest painfully tighten. It was his smile. He knew it instantly, the same curve of the lips, the same mischievous spark he saw in the mirror when he was a child. The place tilted slightly, and he had to grab the back of a chair to steady himself. Clara finally looked up. The color drained from her face, though she didn't flinch. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, time collapsing between them. He saw the years written in the lines of her expression, the exhaustion and the strength carved together into something beautiful and real. The girls were babbling beside her, pulling at her sleeve, but she didn't take her eyes off him. Daniel realized if he spoke now, his voice would betray the trembling in his chest. So he didn't. He stood there like a man caught between the past and the present, the weight of regret pressing against his lungs until it hurt to breathe. She broke away first, pretending to focus on the girls, her fingers trembling slightly. As she picked up a napkin, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she struggled to maintain composure. When the girls began to fidget, Clara gathered their things. She paid quickly and stood up, helping them with their coats. One of the girls looked up at him again, curious, her small hand gripping her mother's fingers. That simple, innocent look tore at him. He couldn't help himself this time. He stood, moving closer, his voice low but firm. Clara, she froze. For a second, she didn't turn. Then, slowly, she looked over her shoulder, her eyes meeting his. Danielle, she said quietly. The sound of his name on her lips almost undid him. The girls looked up at her, confused. Mommy, who is that? Asked the smallest one, softly. Clara hesitated before answering. Just someone I used to know. The words hit him harder than he expected, like a physical blow. He wanted to tell her he had never stopped thinking about her, that not a day had passed without her ghost haunting him. But standing there in front of her, with those two girls, his girls, he was now certain, he couldn't find the courage to say anything. He took another step forward, his voice barely a whisper. Are they yours? She met his eyes with quiet defiance. Ours, she said simply. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. He didn't speak again. He couldn't. She turned and walked toward the door, gripping the girl's hands tightly. He watched them leave, the bell over the door jingling softly as they disappeared into the gray afternoon. For a long time afterward, he remained standing in the middle of the coffee shop, staring at the spot where she had been, the price of cowardice and the accepted redemption. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study with the city lights flickering against the tall glass windows, his thoughts chasing each other in circles. He kept seeing her face, the way her expression had hardened when she looked at him, the way she had pulled the girls closer as if protecting them from him. Every detail was etched in his mind, the small curls in their hair, the way one of them tilted her head when she smiled, the identical blue of their eyes reflecting his own. He knew they were his daughters, and he had missed every first word. Every sleepless night, every laugh. He had missed their entire life due to a decision he had made to protect a reputation that now felt like dust in his hands. He spent days searching, asking around the neighborhood, and then, one afternoon, he found the bookstore, the Emerald City Books. Clara, he said softly, almost hoarsely, I need to talk to you. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then shook her head. There's nothing to talk about. Please, just a few minutes. They sat at a small table near the window. Sunlight filtered through the glass. They are my daughters, she said finally, her tone even but sharp as a knife. You don't get to walk back in after so long and act surprised. I didn't know, Clara. You didn't tell me. She turned to him, her eyes blazing. You made sure I couldn't. You cast me out of your life, Daniel, out of your family's world. You told me I wasn't good enough to stand by your side. What did you expect me to do? Come crawling back, pregnant, begging for approval? He wanted to argue, to tell her he had been young, pressured, scared. But the truth was, there was no excuse that could fix it. I was wrong, he finally said, the words tasting like ash. I was a coward. I thought I was protecting something that mattered, but I was only protecting my own pride. That's the thing about pride, she said, her face shaded. It doesn't mean much when you're holding a baby alone in the middle of the night. I want to be in their lives, he said quietly. Please, let me at least try. Clara shook her head slowly. It's not that simple. They don't know you. They have their life, their routine. I won't let you walk in and turn it upside down because you suddenly remembered how it feels. Then let me earn it, he said. Let me prove I can be the man I should have been from the start. For a long time she didn't speak. Then she sighed, exhaustion clouding her face. I don't trust you, she said softly. Not yet, but they deserve to know the truth someday. So I will allow it, Daniel, but on my terms, at my pace, and under my supervision. If you betray me again, next time, I'll report you to my lawyer, not my heart. He nodded, a mix of relief and pain washing over him. That is all I ask. The conversation ended not with a closure, but with a fragile truce. Clara stood up, her expression soft but firm. He rose too, watching her as she headed toward the back of the shop. The woman he had lost, now the mother of the 2 little girls, who had given him back his soul. Chapter 11. The Path of Waiting and Clara's Rules. Clara's truce was not an invitation. It was a carefully laid minefield. Daniel Ashford had accepted her terms, knowing that every step would either bring him closer to his daughters or blow him apart. The first rule was the hardest for a CEO accustomed to instant gratification. "Wait, you are not going to storm into their lives, Daniel," Clara had told him, in the same quiet, firm tone she used when guiding the twins. "I don't care that you own half of New York. To them, you are a stranger. We will start with letters, then a couple of supervised video calls. When I say they are ready, and only then, you can see them." Daniel agreed. 6 years of unchecked ambition had taken away his ability to wait. Now, 2 small lives were teaching him the true meaning of patience. He returned to New York, but his high-flying life now felt like a cold prison. His office on Park Avenue became a place of torture. He no longer cared about the numbers. He only thought about the mail. The first letter arrived in Seattle 2 days later. It wasn't a formal letter, but a hand-folded sheet of elegant paper. Daniel had struggled for hours to write something. He couldn't start with "I'm sorry." The words were too small. He couldn't start with "I am your father." It was too soon. Finally, he wrote about a memory, something Clara used to read to him when they were together. A Spanish fairy tale about a dragon in Central Park. He retold it, this time illustrated with a clumsy drawing of a smiling dragon he had scribbled. Lily, the more intrepid one, took the envelope. "Who is it, Mommy?" "A friend?" "A very, very, very old friend," Clara said, smiling faintly. "He says he knows a secret about a dragon." She read the story, and the girls loved it. Rose, the more observant one, studied the drawing seriously. "Why is the dragon sad?" Clara didn't know how to answer. Daniel had drawn the dragon's eyes too much like his own. Large, blue, and filled with a lingering sorrow. Interaction question. Do you think Daniel should reveal his identity as Dad in the next letter? Or should he build the connection first as the mystery friend? The Ashford family abyss, Daniel's attempt at redemption, did not go unnoticed on the Upper East Side. Eleanor Ashford burst into his office one morning, a whirlwind of silk and fury. "What in God's name are you doing, Daniel?" she hissed, slamming down a stack of letters addressed to a Clara Hayes with a Seattle postmark that she found on his assistant's desk. "Are you losing your mind? Going back for that bookstore girl?" "This does not concern you, Mother," Daniel said, closing the half-written new letters envelope. "It concerns all of us. We are the Ashfords. It is all about lineage. And I hear a rumor that you are sending love letters to Seattle? Are you jeopardizing your engagement to Camila?" Daniel stood up. His height alone hadn't intimidated his mother in years, but the coldness in his eyes did now. "The engagement to Camila ended 3 months ago, and I am not sending love letters. I am sending letters to my daughters." The shock was a silent weapon. Eleanor stumbled, leaning on the nearest chair, her face suddenly ashen. "Daughters? What nonsense is this?" "Twins," Daniel said, mercilessly, savoring the poetic justice. "They are 2 years old. Their names are Lily and Rose, and yes, Mother, they have my eyes. The same ones you ordered me never to use to look at a bookstore girl." Eleanor finally found her voice, and it was a choked cry of terror. "No, impossible! That woman trapped you! A gold digger! Daniel, if this infamy comes to light, the heirs, the shame." "The shame," he said, picking up one of his letters. "The shame was mine for listening to you. I chose cowardice, and she chose strength. And now, I choose my daughters." He handed her the folder of the Seattle bookstore and the twins' birth certificates. "They are my daughters, Mother. And not only are they not gold diggers, but by your own cowardice, the woman you once cast out now has an undeniable claim to everything I own. You either support me in this, or you will watch me fight for them in the public square, revealing every secret we have kept. You choose, but you will no longer choose me over them. Eleanor, for the first time in her life, looked defeated. The world she had built so precisely for her son was crumbling due to two small, beautiful cracks in its foundation. The first video call and the awkward question. Weeks later, Clara finally agreed to the next level. A supervised video call. Daniel sat in an anonymous hotel apartment in Seattle. He was only a mile away from them, but it felt a million miles away. His laptop screen lit up, and there they were. Lily and Rose were sitting on Clara's lap, giggling. Lily wore a yellow sweater, Rose a blue one. Their small faces were perfect, identical, and those eyes, his blue eyes, stared directly into the camera. "Hello," Daniel said, and his voice cracked. He felt like a fool, a novice. "Hello, dragon!" Lily shouted, the quicker one, without an ounce of fear. "I'm not a dragon, I am the mysterious friend," Clara interjected, with a warning glance. "Yes," Daniel said, smiling, a nervous but real smile. "I am your friend." The call lasted 10 minutes. Lily babbled about a new book. Rose, on the other hand, remained silent. She looked at Daniel. Her big blue eyes scanned him with intense, disarming curiosity. Just as Clara was about to end the call, Rose spoke. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Friend, where is your scarf?" Daniel blinked. My scarf? "Yes, Mommy wears a scarf when it's cold. You look cold." The innocence of the question hit him. Cold. She had looked at a man in an expensive suit, alone in a room, and judged him as cold. He saw the truth in his own daughter's eyes. "You are right, Rose," he said, his voice tight. "I am a little cold. Thank you for noticing." "You are welcome," she said, and only then did she give him a fleeting smile. The call ended. Daniel stared at his own reflection on the blank screen. He was cold. He had spent years in a world that demanded emotional detachment. His daughters knew it instantly. He stood up, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He called his assistant, not for a financial report, but to order something. The gift of the Nook and the final ultimatum. A week later, Daniel returned to the Emerald City Books in Seattle. He wasn't driving his usual Mercedes, but a discreet rental car, dressed in jeans and a cashmere sweater. Clara was behind the counter. She raised an eyebrow at his attire. "You look normal, trying to warm up," Daniel said, quoting his daughter. "And what brings you here, Daniel? You know the girls are at home." "I'm not here for them. I'm here for this." He stepped aside. Two men in overalls carried in what looked like a beautifully carved reading chair and a low, custom-made bookshelf. Clara gasped. "What is this?" "A reading nook," he said. "I saw where the girls sit. The light is poor and the marble floor is cold. This nook is for them. The shelf is fully stocked. Books their mother used to read, and some new ones about smiling dragons." Clara felt a knot form in her throat. The nook was perfect, warm and cozy, with embroidered pillows. It was an act of service, not of arrogance. "You don't have to do this," she said, the words tight. "Yes, I do," he said. "I took away the warmth and comfort of their father. I cast you out, and that cost me 2 years of their lives. I can't buy them, Clara, but I can warm the floor beneath their feet." Silence fell as the movers left, leaving only the sweet scent of new wood. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, the ice in her eyes began to melt. She didn't hate him. She missed him, and seeing the genuine discomfort and regret on this arrogant man's face was a balm. "Thank you, Daniel," she said quietly. "It is the first real gift you have given me. It's a start, perhaps." She leaned across the counter, her eyes fixed on his. "But listen to me closely. You have a world. I have another. I don't need your money. I don't want your name. I only want a good father for my daughters. Next week, we are going to a park in Seattle. We will be there at 11. We will be close by. You will sit on a bench across the park. You will not talk to them. Just watch them. Clara, I can't. That is my condition, Daniel. You have to learn to see them from afar. See them without touching them. See them without talking to them. See them as a blessing that doesn't belong to you, yet. It is the price of admission. It is the penitence for arrogance. Daniel looked at the new reading nook, and then at the woman who now owned his destiny. The world of high finance had never asked him to sit and do nothing. I will be there, he said. And this time, the man who spoke was not the CEO. He was the father. The silent penitence in the park. The morning of the encounter was cold but sunny. The kind of day in Seattle that promises an early spring. Daniel Ashford arrived at Green Lake Park at 10:30 a.m., half an hour before the agreed time. He parked his discreet car far away, put on a simple jacket, and walked to the iron bench Clara had specified. The bench was strategically placed. It was on the opposite side of a wide expanse of well-kept lawn. From there, he could see the sand playground and the small carousel, but he was too far to be recognized or to hear his daughter's laughter. It was a distance designed for torture. He sat down. For the first time in his life, Daniel had no agenda, no phone, no assistant. He only had the obligation to do nothing. His heart pounded with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation that far exceeded any feeling he had before a multi-million-dollar board meeting. He took out a pair of sunglasses, not for the sun, but to hide the intense, almost painful concentration in his eyes. At 10:58 a.m. he saw them. Clara entered the park, her hands firmly held by two tiny figures in identical plaid coats, Lily and Rose. The air seemed to leave Daniel's lungs. They looked even smaller, more perfect in the daylight than they looked on the laptop screen. Clara led them straight to the sandbox. She sat on the edge, watching them as they began to dig with plastic shovels. Her hair, pulled back into a simple ponytail, shone under the sun. There was no makeup, no haute couture, just a beautiful, tired woman and her daughters. Daniel forced himself to stay still. His penitence began. Silent observation. He watched Lily, the intrepid one, dominate the sandbox, directing Rose in building a dragon castle. He watched Rose, the observer, pause to look around, and then smile quietly at her sister's antics. He watched Clara wipe Lily's nose, dry the mud off Rose's gloves. He watched her laugh out loud when Lily tried to climb onto a seesaw, too big for her. It was a laugh Daniel remembered with grief, a laugh he had tried to extinguish in her so she would fit into the rigidity of his world. The moment that broke him was quiet, simple. Lily ran to her mother, and without words, Clara opened her arms and hugged her. Rose, seeing this, ran too. Clara held them both, one on each knee, her face buried in their small necks, her hands circling their coats. That image, the unity, the warmth, the absolute protection, forged by Clara alone, was the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever seen, and he was not part of it. He felt a physical ache in his chest. Tears blurred his sunglasses, and he had to lean forward, resting his elbows on his knees, breathing deeply. He had traded this. He had traded this warmth for a cold glass office and a silent dinner with his mother. Interaction question. What do you think Daniel felt more while observing his daughters? Regret for what he lost, or the certainty that Clara is now a stronger woman without him? A gesture of truce and Clara's reaction. Time dragged on. At 11:45 a.m., Clara checked her watch and began packing up. The girls protested, but were obedient. Daniel straightened up, his heart hammered with the need to approach, to say something, to justify his presence. But he had committed. He stayed still. Clara guided the girls toward a picnic table near the park entrance. Daniel followed them with his gaze, his mind frantic. Would they leave now? How long would it take for the next meeting? Then he saw Clara stop. She pulled out a tissue and wiped Rose's lips. She turned slowly and looked directly at the iron bench. Daniel froze. There was a considerable distance, but their eyes met. She didn't smile. Her expression was unreadable. Neither anger nor forgiveness, just a serene, cold evaluation. She had been watching him as much as he had been watching her. Clara gave him a single, slight nod. It was a gesture. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a welcome. It was a simple, silent acknowledgement that he had passed his test. Then, she turned. She took each girl's hand and walked out of the park with them, walking at a steady pace. Daniel remained seated. The silence they left behind was deafening. He took off his sunglasses and ran a hand over his face. Grief and relief flooded him at once. He hadn't been rejected, but his heart felt as if it had been dismantled and put back together. He got up and walked to where they had been, to the sandbox. He knelt down, feeling the cool sand between his fingers. He saw a small footprint. His daughter's footprint. He stood there for a long time, a powerful CEO in a thousands of dollars suit, feeling the humility of the sand and the magnitude of what he had lost, the mother's decision and the new territory. That night, Daniel sent Clara a text message. It wasn't a formal letter or a drawing, just one word. "Thank you." The reply arrived 20 minutes later. "The test is over, Daniel. Passed. I saw you." And they saw you too. Daniel shot up from his chair. "They saw me?" "Yes. I told them a very nice man came to the park today. I didn't point you out, but they noticed the big man on the bench." Rose said, "You don't look so cold anymore." A wave of uncontrollable emotion washed over him. He laughed, a rough, rusty sound. "Now, the next step, and it is entirely on my territory." Clara continued. "Tomorrow is Wednesday. The bookstore closes early. I will be at the Emerald City Books from 5 o'clock p.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. You will come. We will not talk about business or your family or mine. You will simply sit and read a book with them. A fairy tale. That is all. It is real time, not video call time. Do you accept?" Daniel looked at the screen, his heart pounding with the ferocity of a man who has just won a multi-million-dollar contract. This was the first time he was allowed to interact with them, the first time he was allowed to breathe the same air as his daughters. "I accept," he replied. "Good. And Daniel, one more thing. Don't try to buy them with expensive books or gifts. Just bring me your time. It is the one thing you took from me, and the only thing you can give back." Daniel put away his phone. Clara's lesson was painfully clear. Money and power hadn't opened the door. Only humility and waiting had. He had to become the man he had been, or at least the man she believed he could be. Tomorrow, the man who was once the master of business would face his hardest examination. The twins' reading nook, the CEO and the fairy tale. The afternoon was warm and quiet in the Pike Place area of Seattle. The Emerald City Books was silent. The soft bell on the door jingled when Daniel entered at 4:58 p.m. Clara was behind the counter, closing the register. She wore a knitted sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back. She looked relaxed, but her eyes were filled with a quiet tension. "Punctual," Clara said, her voice low. 2 minutes early. Daniel wasn't wearing a suit. He wore the same cashmere sweater he'd worn at the store, but this time it felt too tight. "I don't want to give you any more reasons to hate me," he said, breathing deeply the familiar scent of old paper and coffee. "I don't hate you, Daniel. I am just evaluating you." She nodded toward the nook. The area he had donated was now perfectly integrated. bright-colored cushions, a soft wool blanket, and the bookshelf full of picture books. Lily and Rose were already there. They were sitting on the rug, playing with wooden blocks. Seeing him, they both stopped. "Scarf friend," Lily whispered, pointing. Rose stood up and hid shyly behind her sister's knee. "Sit in the armchair, Daniel," Clara said quietly. "Don't force them." Daniel obeyed, feeling ridiculously large and awkward in the small velvet armchair. The twins stared at him. "Hello, girls," he said, and his voice sounded hoarse and too loud in the quiet of the bookstore. There was silence. Only the soft sound of jazz music floated from a distant speaker. Lily, the brave one, broke the ice. She walked cautiously toward the bookshelf and pulled out a bright-covered book. The book was none other than the tale from his childhood, The Sad Dragon of Central Park. She held it out to Daniel. "Read it," Lily said simply. Daniel took the book. The pages felt foreign in his hands, more accustomed to the weight of contract bond paper. "I would love to," he said. Rose, encouraged by her sister's action, let go of Clara's hand and walked toward the armchair. She curled up against the armrest, close enough to feel his warmth, but maintaining a safe distance. Lily sat on the floor in front of him. The examination had begun. The Dragon and a Father's Broken Heart. Daniel opened the book. His voice, the same voice that commanded hundreds of employees and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, now wavered as he read the first line. "Once upon a time, in the heart of New York, there was a dragon so big that its sadness filled the entire city." He didn't read. He remembered. He remembered telling this story to Clara in bed, in the apartment they had shared, whispering it like a secret. As he read, he immersed himself in the rhythm of the story, realizing that every word, every inflection, was a version of himself he had buried. The dragon was sad because he had cast out the person he loved most. Reaching the page where the dragon realizes that the treasure he has amassed is not worth the love he lost, Daniel's voice hitched. He looked up. Lily stared at him in awe. Rose, now sitting on the corner cushion near his leg, raised a tiny hand and gently touched his chin. "Friend, why are you really sad?" Rose asked, echoing her earlier question. Daniel had to breathe deeply. He put down the book. He wasn't the sad scarf friend. He was the sad dragon. Because the dragon, Daniel cleared his throat. The dragon in the story was very foolish. He let go of his best friend. And now he has realized that the treasure he thought was important, the tall buildings, the gold, is not worth a laugh. "And now?" Lily asked. "And now," Daniel said, looking at his two small faces, and then at Clara, who was watching from a distance with a soft, unreadable expression. "Now the dragon is doing everything he can to show his best friend that he has changed. He is asking for another chance." Rose climbed onto Daniel's lap without asking permission and curled up like a small kitten. Daniel's hand, without thinking, circled her small waist. His daughter. His blood. "The dragon is very strong," Lily declared authoritatively. "He can try." "Yes," Daniel said, hugging Rose tighter. "The dragon will try." A father, not a CEO. The minutes that followed were not about reading. They were about touch. Lily joined them, sitting on the floor and leaning her head against Daniel's knee. He set the book aside, and instead, in a soft voice no one in his professional life had ever heard, he made up an alternative ending for the dragon. An ending where the dragon learned to share his cave. Daniel forgot his suit, his mother, the money. He was simply a man, sitting on the floor, surrounded by two creatures he didn't know, but loved more than his own life. At 600 p.m. Chartreuse, Clara approached. "Time to go home, girls. Say goodbye to the friend." Lily and Rose stood up. Lily gave Daniel a quick, tight hug around the neck before running off to her mother. Rose, however, stopped. She walked up, lifted her 2 small hands, and patted his cheek. "Goodbye, Daddy of the Dragon," she whispered. Daniel's heart stopped. She had called him Daddy. It wasn't a mistake. It was an instinct. She had figured it out. He sat there, paralyzed by the overwhelming emotion. He looked at Clara. She had heard the word. She didn't flinch. Her gaze was calm, waiting. Daniel stood up, his legs trembling. He began, his voice shaking. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," Clara said, her voice now filled with a warmth he hadn't heard in years. "She already knows. She is your daughter." Daniel walked up to Clara, and for the first time, there was no hostility, only a shared grief. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for being strong when I was a coward. Thank you for raising them." Clara sighed, exhausted. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for them." "But yes, you're welcome." She looked him in the eyes. Tomorrow you can be Daddy, but at the park, and with a scarf." She turned away, and with a soft goodbye from the twins, the small family left the bookstore, leaving Daniel alone. But for the first time in 2 years, the silence was not cold. It was filled with the warm promise of a second chance, final reflection, and call to action. Rose has revealed the secret. Daniel has been accepted by his daughter. The path is difficult, but Clara's truce has proven to be an act of love, not revenge. Do you think Daniel will finally earn Clara's forgiveness? Or will the interference of his mother, Eleanor Ashford, test this new peace again? If you enjoyed this emotional reunion, like and share. Subscribe for the next dramatic chapter.